Welcome back. In the last lesson, we wired up our taco spinner button with a keyboard listener. So I can now press the T key on my keyboard to spin that taco, just like we can on click. And in this lesson, we're going to take a look at improving this a little bit further and starting to wire up our burrito button, which currently does absolutely nothing. And currently inside of our JavaScript file, we have selected a reference to our taco button using document.getElementById, and then we have added a click listener and added a key listener to that using that single reference. Now, certainly with our burrito button, because it has its own unique ID as well, as you'll see here in our HTML, we have button ID equals burrito-btn. We could do the same thing with that, but that would require us to duplicate this same code. And that's certainly something we want to avoid. It's not going to be a good pattern to write custom code every time you have a single button that you need to do something. What we want is we want a reusable web interaction component that we can use as many times as we would like in our application. And in order to do that, we're going to use a different method of selection to actually iterate over all of the buttons that we want to have this same functionality. And then that way we can create a single button click listener and a single button key listener that will handle that interaction on all of the buttons where we decide to do that. So let's take a look at how that's going to work. The first thing I want to do is just maybe clean up the HTML a little bit and the CSS a little bit to make these more reusable. So I want to make them more similar to each other than they currently are. You'll see right now we have this taco button span class equals taco, burrito button span class equals burrito. And what I want to do is let's first of all, we'll change. So instead of having span class equals taco and span class equals burrito, I want these to be kind of similar. So in both of those instances, we can just call that the spinner. So we want that to be the spinner within the button itself. And then that way they're now a little bit more similar. And also, let's maybe add a class to each of these. We'll just call it spin button, spin-btn. And so the class for each of those is going to be info space spin button. So just kind of giving them some similar traits that we could perhaps use to select these in our JavaScript when we make changes there. So that's not going to do anything, but we will want to make sure, because I don't think our spin animation is going to work now because we changed this class to spinner. We will want to make sure in our app.sass file that we change this .taco to .spinner. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow our taco button to spin, but also whenever our burrito button has a class of spin, it's also going to be able to spin. So we haven't done that yet. I'm just doing that right inside of the developer tools. So it doesn't actually happen on click. But now that the burrito button does have the ability to spin if we were to wire up that functionality. And now that we've done that inside of our JavaScript file, let's just above all of this code up here, what we're going to do is instead of getting a reference to a single taco button using document.getElementId, we're going to use that other method of selection where we're going to iterate all spin buttons. And then in order to do that, just like we saw in the previous lesson, we can use document.querySelectorAll. So we want to select all instances, all HTML elements that match this selector. And in this case, we can use that spin button class that we added to each of those buttons. So again, in our HTML file, we added spin button as a class onto each one of these buttons. And then this way, we can select them all using document.querySelectorAll. And then we could simply say that for each button, then do something to each button. And now that we are iterating over each button, we can basically take the same click listeners that we had before. I'm going to cut those. Let's get rid of our taco button reference because we no longer need that. And instead, we'll paste this into our iterator. And then we're going to change our references that were previously selected in this taco button. We'll change each of the 4 instances of that with multiple cursors to simply btn or button, which is the parameter we're capturing in our iterator function up here. So for each button, it's going to create an event listener for click, and then it's going to spin the taco on click. And then for each button, it's also going to add the key down listener and say, if you press the T key, then invoke a click on that as well. So all we did was we just kind of moved all this logic into an iterator. And now instead of having to write this for each button using that document.getElement by ID or whatever that was called, we're putting it in an iterator, and now you'll see we can click on the taco button. It still spins as it did before, but we can also click on a burrito button to spin that one as well. And you can toggle both of them, and they both are now kind of functioning as their own individual isolated component, which is what we want, because we can now create as many spin buttons as we care to. And we don't have to constantly come back to our JavaScript and update this. All we would have to do is simply come in here, duplicate this once again, and maybe we want to make, pizza button. So let's make a pizza button, because we all like pizza, right? Pizza's awesome. Whoops. Let's change this to a pizza. There we go. And now that we've added pizza button, we'll hit save there. I'll need to update the CSS just a bit to give that a little bit of style. So let's add up here. Let's change this from these ID selectors to just spin button, because we added that class to each one. So for our spin buttons, we'll give them a style like that to just make this nice and reusable as well, so we don't have to come and update our CSS in the future. And you know what? I don't even have to add this custom color, because in our theme file, now that we have multiple of these, this info class here, there's like some different classes, and you can take a look at this in config. You see all these different colors, variables that I've defined here, but you can do like info, danger, success, warning. So maybe we do like the burrito will be a danger button. That sounds awesome. Danger button. And then the pizza will be a warning button maybe. And now if we hit save here, you'll see they get their different classes. And then let's make them a little bit shorter too. So let's update our Sass and bring this down to like 150, maybe 140. There we go. That looks good. So now we have 3 totally different buttons. And the cool thing about this is now that we've set up our CSS and we've set up our JavaScript, it's as easy as just like duplicating this content to create 3 different spinners. How awesome is this app now? We can spin all different types of food, and it's strangely awesome. This is so weird, isn't it? It's such a weird example that we're starting with, but maybe it gives you guys a little bit of a peek into the mind of Kyle. It's pretty strange up there. But anyway, so we've now created this reusable component, and the awesome thing is I could come in and I could duplicate this once again as many times as you want, because we've created this reusable component. I could create, let's pick another emoji for food. Whoops, food. And let's give the vegetarians out there some love. So we'll do an apple button. So we'll do apple right here, apple button, and we'll give that a class of success. We hit save here. You'll see just by adding some HTML, didn't have to update the JavaScript. Boom, we have a spin button down here. How cool is that, right? And now we just have this crazy application where you can spin all kinds of food. I'm not actually going to add the apple button. I think it's getting a little too messy now. Too much spinning. My eyes are starting to go crazy. But you can see just how easy it is now that we've made this reusable, and we've utilized an iterator to go over each of our spin buttons, how we're able to very quickly and easily duplicate that content and create essentially a component that we can use throughout our web application. And as we get into later lessons and we start to extend this to things like drop-down menus and modals and all kinds of more advanced stuff, you can imagine you don't want to have to like go in and add code every time you want to do a drop-down menu. You want to be able to just change some HTML, and it's already wired up. It already works. So this is a great way to kind of create those isolated reusable components and use an iterator as opposed to a single sort of static selection of an HTML element. Use an iterator to go over them and create as many as you want. But this doesn't mean that our switch interaction is perfect just yet. In the next lesson, we're going to take a look at some potential issues with the way we've implemented this using a document.querySelectorAll to iterate over all the buttons. And we're going to talk about ways that we can improve this even further and change this up a bit to make it even better in a larger variety of scenarios. So stay tuned, and we'll start with improving this taco spinner here in just a moment.